to Allison McDowell. Is Allison available now, Basu?
Yep, I'm here.
Allison, hey.
I'm here. Hey, sorry, I didn't realize it was muted. Yeah, so
you're gonna, no, let me introduce you.
Oh, you can do that.
Let's see, are you gonna share the screen or is Basu gonna do that?
I think I will if that's possible.
No, that's fine, absolutely. So let me just say we are so thrilled to have Allison here. So if any of you aren't familiar with her website, wrenchinthegears.com, I highly urge you to go there. She started her journey in investigating privatization of Philadelphia's public school system. And she has done a deeper dive than anybody I know on corporate education reform and how it's really related to the hedge funds and the big banks and everything that we're going through right now, the world of technocracy. And she's going to focus for us today on how that all relates to special ed, in which many of us have spent many, many years. So we're thrilled to have you, Allison, and thank you.
Oh, well, thanks for the invitation. This is actually a really important audience because I have long felt that if parents of special needs children and the health defense community was aware of the larger financial context of what was happening, y'all are the most organized and powerful force that it would really make a difference. So I'm really glad to be able to have this opportunity. Like Mary said, I'm based in Philadelphia, and I don't have a special needs child, but I did come into all of this as a parent fighting around public education. And I do have a close friend who has a child with special needs, who's a single parent, a Black woman. And so I've had some insights from her perspective on what it's like to navigate challenging service, both within the school system and also within the Medicaid system. So I do have some perspective on this. And I will say I'm just a little, like, bear with me because I'm sort of coming from outside this community. If I misspeak on any of these things, a lot of what is coming that's tied in with these financial markets is driven by data analytics. And so foundational to this entire enterprise, because it is underpinned by data, technology is a huge part of that, technological surveillance. And I know for many families that technology offers supports and a bridge for kids. But I think also if people aren't aware of the larger forces at play, the way in which we use technology or choose, make those choices, not everyone is fully informed by that. So that's sort of my perspective, is that these technological systems come out of a certain history and have a certain power to them, especially as more and more online platforms are linked with artificial intelligence and feedback loops and neural engineering, really. So I've called this Autism Engineered for Impact, and this focus around human capital finance is very much around the data analytics that document so-called impact investing. It's almost unimaginable. But the image that I have on the right-hand side, it's from a white paper that was developed by Ready Nation and the Kauffman Family Foundation out of Kansas City. And it's from 2012. So like we're almost going on, 10 years in, where they are talking about, and this is specifically pre-K, but it applies to all sorts of other, essentially these folks are reframing people's needs within the larger social welfare state, whether those needs are around education or training or healthcare or food assistance or housing assistance or any of these other things that we would expect our government or accountable elected government to provide, has been gutted. And we know that has been gutted through austerity for a very long time, but now is poised to be remade as investment opportunities for private capital, for global capital specifically. This is not capital strictly limited to the United States, it's global capital. And so I put it in context saying that the last time we had this major global economic crisis, it was around the housing and real estate market. And that was because there was such a disparity in which wealth was held in such small hands of such small people. They had to actually create, like, from the ground up markets in debt finance instruments that could be traded. And actually, ultimately, the people who made out were people who shorted this market, who saw it coming. And so in the 10 years plus following this, the wealth has only become more concentrated, especially in the hands of the finance, military, defense, and pharmaceutical sectors and chemical engineering sectors. And so this next debt finance instrument that they're in the position they have been creating at least since 2007 is human capital bonds. So reframing humans as financial bonded instruments. And I knew all of this coming into it through the education element. But I think increasingly the medical protocols that are going to be underway are going to be almost like layered in with eugenics of reshaping what natural life looks like through digital intervention, through pharmaceutical interventions towards some new manifestation of life as determined by these very powerful interests. Okay, and they are starting in particular with young children and particularly targeting Black and Indigenous women, maternal health disparities, and all of it sounds super progressive, unless you understand that the social safety net has been turned into sort of a fascistic, imminent fascism, enterprise. It sounds good, and that is why it's very challenging for me as someone who comes from more of a left-leaning progressive side to deconstruct this for people. But it's very clear in this image that they've talked about remaking toddlers through universal pre-K as asset-backed securities. So I'm just going to, let me see if this will, I have a friend, I tried to explain this. So I've done like 3 or 4 hour programs just on this structure, right? But I have a friend who does like film. And so he pulled clips from a longer interview I did. So this is like 2 minutes of me explaining social impact bonds. Now social impact bonds are also called pay for success finance or outcomes-based government contracting. So I'm just gonna play this for a couple minutes because it's...
So this idea of a social impact bond is essentially reimagining our lives and social relationships as future debt projections, whether that's being educated, whether that is healthcare, whether that is housing, access or subsidies, food subsidies, being involved in the judicial system. All of these have numbers attached to them. And then they say, well, if we can provide an evidence-based what works intervention, we will pay this much money, which is a smaller amount than we would pay if all these bad things happen to you, and we would have to pay a lot more to fix you after the fact. We'll just preemptively fix you. Only the problem is it's essentially pre-crime. Now, the problem is that the terms of these agreements, which are essentially privatizing government services that the government should just be de facto providing, but then the government through austerity says we can't provide it unless we can be assured that it works. And so they outsource it to these nonprofits, some of whom are faith-based nonprofits, to do these social welfare services under conditions of a performance-based contract. The profit isn't in the tiny slice of return on investment. It is actually in the fact that they're going to securitize all the debt and that hedge funds are going to trade off of that debt. The game can't go unless you have the structure. They can't run the bets unless the game goes on. So they have to build the game. And that game is being built right now. They need all of the data to slosh around in a big pool because they can't justify taking profit off the fact that you didn't become addicted if they can't track that against some intervention they put you on in middle school. All of that data has to interlock, and that's what's going to come with digital identity. And that digital identity system is something that the World Wide Web Consortium has been working on for like 15 years. And I had thought it was going to come through education transcript records, but clearly now it seems like the much bigger plan is to have it come through these medical passport protocols.
Okay, so that's a lot, but essentially the takeaways that I like in the framing is that people's rights to social supports, especially special needs children and their families, will be weaponized. I mean, it's always been difficult to navigate, and now it will be further weaponized. They are creating cost offsets in labeling large swaths of the population as debt instruments and deficits. It's a full-on deficit model, even when the deficit hasn't happened yet. And so I know, with children on the spectrum or special needs kids, they actually do have a diagnosis. Some of these other cost offsets around addiction and incarceration would be they're profiling you based on your zip code and your genomics and your parents into pre-crime, right? So this is sort of this larger backdrop. Now, there's a cost offset in the equations, and these equations are developed by very esteemed universities. So, Harvard Kennedy School, University of Chicago, Georgetown, they create, Teachers College, Columbia. They create equations to justify these markets. And to do that, they need a cost offset to say, if we intervene and reduce your dependency on social services, we've saved the government money. That's the sum. So there's a huge cost offset in the prison industrial complex, but there's also a huge cost offset in special education services. And so most of the pre-K social impact bond deals for justifying giving children pre-K, which is now moving into online preschool, because that's where they're going to get the data, is leveraged against not providing IEPs. So the first universal pre-K social impact bond was in Salt Lake City, and Goldman Sachs backed it. And they screened children into this pay for success finance. They said, these children, if we give them pre-K, Goldman Sachs funded pre-K, we're betting that they won't need special education services. And of the 100 children who qualified for the program that was paid for by Goldman Sachs, only one of them at the entrance to kindergarten was identified as needing an IEP. Which is crazy, because even the New York Times has said these numbers don't add up. Even if you gave them the top tier best pre-K, which this wasn't, you wouldn't only have 1% of the kids coming in at that level if you screen them that they are going to need it. So either they were screening in children who were maybe English language learners who were never going to need, they just needed time to catch up, or you're denying services, but probably some combination of both. And so Goldman Sachs gets this big payout for essentially having kids denied services. So special education is a very large cost offset in the same way prison is a big cost offset, because they have very specific granular numbers around that. And so you can see on this image, special education being linked very closely with pay for success finance as this cost offset. So this is just an infographic, and I'll share these slides with you guys afterwards, but it just speaks to sort of the process. This is predicated on the premise, in air quotes here, that people are broken. Their investment opportunity is based on profiling people from a deficit mindset, not looking at individuals as for their gifts or what they bring to society, or humans to be nurtured in all their capabilities. Their incentive is to say, these are all the things that we think are going to be wrong with you and how you are going to be a burden. And that is what this financial structure is built on. And that is why it's brutal and horrible, and we have to stop it. So we have the austerity. This is sort of in the upper left. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. It goes to these contracts, these outcomes-based contracts, which actually go back to the mid-1990s. Arthur Rolnick, who worked with Jim Heckman, who set up the equation, was one of the head economists for the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. So these early contracts go to the mid-1990s, but they didn't have the technology to scale them. Then they identify a success metric. So they come up with a number, just like for the Goldman Sachs pre-K, it was, these children are not going to need an IEP. And then they put a number on that, and then they bet on that number. So this might have to do with special needs students needing services, right? They get a certain service and then somehow it reduces a future service. But the success metrics are very narrow, and they're not necessarily meant to actually solve the problem or help the child. They're just meant to generate a data point that will serve the financial markets. So then investors invest in these products, and at that point, they can securitize the debt and it becomes traded. And so this is sort of the point I want to really hit home, especially because within the communities around special education, is they are going to try to push more and more children into digital spaces, into digital interventions. There are whole areas opening up now that blend education and medicalization and mental health. And they're starting to develop like digital therapeutics, the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and shaping children's neural pathways. And the question is, if you create this as a global financial market with the potential that that debt is securitized and someone might short it, you may conceivably have technological interventions that children are put on that are incentivized to harm them. So that is, that's a pretty intense thing to think about, but I think we need to go there because that's how these things work, especially as they become more automated. Then people are monitored for the impact data. So again, it legitimizes mass surveillance of targeted communities. And within this structure, there is always a third party reviewing the data. Okay, so that is to give it an air of neutrality, that someone else has looked at the data and agrees that the impact metrics were met. In this case, I've done a lot of work. Santa Clara, California is a test bed for this. It's Silicon Valley, and they did a universal pre-K, a third grade literacy, a mental health, and a housing social impact bond. The mental health and the housing social impact bond, and I guess this also relates to special needs people like as adults, right? Because they often need wraparound services in terms of housing support and other things. The data was reviewed by Palantir, which is Peter Thiel's company, which is tied to predictive policing and homeland security. Okay, so this is in Northern California. Clearly, if you're a family that needs housing and someone in your extended family may not have their documentation, the fact that Palantir, a policing state surveillance apparatus, is reviewing the data is a problem. And then at that point, the deal is either paid back or not paid back. So that's sort of the arc of how this works. And it is all a fiction. And I want to emphasize this. This is a construct. This is a game where global finance has set the terms of the game with the Rockefeller Foundation. And this is really important to understand for people in the health defense community, that Rockefeller is a major player. They have created these markets. Judith Rodin, who is the former president of University of Pennsylvania, where I'm at, left the presidency there, became the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, and she set this all up. It's called the Global Impact Investment Network. And now it is tied in with the Impact Management Project, which is the 2,000 largest asset holders in the world. And all of this is tied in with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17. Many of them are about managing people in poverty. Number 3 is health, and number 4 is education. So you can see for special needs students, both of those are going to play into the equation. So the medical passport system, I cannot emphasize this enough, is only the beginning. It is the system that will enable the interoperable predictive analytics to run these global markets in human capital. So this is just, Goldman Sachs is all over this. There was Ian Galloway, who's with the San Francisco Federal Reserve, is a key player in laying this out. And he presented to this Ready Nation group saying, like, every social impact bond is different except for Goldman Sachs, because they pretty much made out of thin air all of the social impact bonds. And there's a huge presence in Salt Lake City, Utah, and the Goldman Sachs has an industrial banking system there. So this is tied with the industrial banking program. But they had another one in Chicago that was linking kindergarten readiness, and you can see reductions in special education as the cost offset, and third grade literacy. So that has to do with the third grade reading guarantees that children in some states can't proceed unless they hit a target on the test scores. This is all about the financial markets. And clearly the children in Chicago were not getting quality education. I mean, it was gutted even before COVID. The schools were falling apart. They weren't clean. The kids had bad books, like everything. But Goldman Sachs was getting their maximum rate of return. So there are layers in this. And again, special education and IEP denial or management is a key part of that. So last week I actually did a program, and I would recommend it because there was a lot of overlap with some folks in California about dyslexia, because there's a huge push around dyslexia, compulsory dyslexia screening legislation that's going on that is also linked to these markets. So they're going to compulsorily screen every child, whether or not they are at risk, starting in kindergarten, 90 days into their kindergarten experience, even in California, where 30% of the children don't come in necessarily with English as their first language, to push them onto literacy apps. So this is the apps, not just to make money for the app companies, but to set up the human capital bond markets. And so this is the cost offset from Boston Consulting Group, which is part of this. They have identified dyslexia as $1 trillion cost to California's economy, which allows them to push all sorts of digital management onto the children preemptively and take all of this money and profile these children. And what I found incredibly, this was done with UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, Boston Consulting Group, their dyslexia center. And they actually, you can see where the arrow is pointing. This is talking about cost to families of dyslexia around emotional counseling and litigation. So they're actually counting in the cost offset for future interventions the fact that families have to litigate against school districts to provide what they are supposed to be providing. And I know this is apparent in the Philadelphia public schools, that these districts are set up to not meet the needs of children under their IEPs and to simply play the numbers. And so eventually they will just say, you know, like they'll pay out the few families that have the wherewithal and the stamina to sue them successfully. And that's their cost analysis, is that's how they're going after it. So I think the way in which Boston Consulting Group looks at dyslexia is very likely to overlap with children on the spectrum who have been identified with autism. And here we can see, this is a paper from 2019. They're setting it up, the economic costs of autism spectrum disorder. Okay, so I'm not saying that there aren't economic costs, but again, once you begin to use pay for success finance as the intervention, everything becomes driven by predictive analytics, a deficit mindset, and data surveillance of these children and their families. So, and to me, even outside of all of this, before I understand fully the human capital finance, it is about, I called the educational technology sector fracking children. You know, I'm from Pennsylvania. This fracking idea is central. And, you know, Eric Schmidt, who's been very clear about in New York that he wants to reimagine education with Cuomo, that, you know, that the most important resource, that data is the new oil. Okay. And if you understand that these markets run on people who have a lot of challenges, right? Whether that's socioeconomic challenges, they've experienced trauma, they have complex needs. Those individuals who have deep need, but are perceived of as fixable within the constraints of a data analytics world, will be targeted. And what is coming next with education, the plan is to completely unbundle it and have like Pokemon Go collect badges and skill points and demonstrate good behavior in an increasingly smart surveillance environment. And my sense is that parents will be encouraged to take digital vouchers, that this will be connected to e-currency, these education savings accounts, which have targeted special needs families, and that they will be told that that is liberation, but it is not, because everywhere that they will be able to spend these vouchers will be collecting the data analytics under even more surveillance in all of the spaces that unschooling and homeschooling families have used, the libraries, the community centers. Those will all be linked. If they take these digital vouchers, they will be linked into the system, into the fracking system. So this is actually a device that's used in the Philadelphia public schools, and it's called RoboKind, Advanced Social Robotics. There's a ton of research on social robotics that's come out of MIT Media Lab. And people need to understand that MIT is essentially the war machine. Is the war machine. It is also the Sloan Business School is a center for the development of digital currency initiatives. So they are saying that they are going to use this robot as they've pulled more and more human supports out of classrooms, and that they will have children engage directly with robots and tablets that you can see there, that I pointed these tablets, as improving outcomes. Now, the outcomes that they're talking about improving are the data analytics on a dashboard for the human capital finance. And increasingly, the screen-based technologies are collecting emotional responses. There are cameras that can like blink. This is a guy from MIT, a light off the back of your retina, like Zoom could be doing it to all of you now, to see how engaged you are with the content I'm sharing and what your pulse rate is. They get the pulse rate off the back of your retina. So we don't know what kind of behavioral data is being collected on these children. And then based on their responsiveness, once you start to layer in AI, how they are going to be engineered towards a certain outcome. And is this outcome Goldman Sachs's outcome? And if you understand that the future Goldman Sachs and the most powerful people on the planet are imagining is almost post-human, where we live as cartoon characters, what feedback loops are they putting children into? So again, this is Jim Heckman and JB Pritzker, who's funding him. His Heckman's Human Capital Economic Opportunity Group is out of the Becker Friedman School of Economics. So, you know, Chicago boys neoliberalism, but is also, most of his funding comes from Open Society, which is George Soros. So again, you have, this is fully bipartisan. All of this is fully bipartisan. And they've gone up and down the state of California. This was a few years ago, pitching the pre-K pay for success model. And what they've said is that that they can't change IQ for the purposes of these investment equations because IQ hardens up, but they can change character. They can actually do like digitally brainwash children for financial markets. It says it is still true that these character skills are more manipulable. In a sense, they are our target of opportunity. So we have computed the rate of return, the kind of rate of return that venture capitalists worry about and should properly worry about, and that many of you probably worry about. What we have found was the rate of return was something like Perry Preschool was between 7 and 10% annum, right? So they're saying there's a 7 to 10% rate of return on brainwashing children. And again, like, how does that work with, that's all children, right? But children who are already, struggling in other ways, right? How does that work? So Heckman, this is actually there's a social emotional learning, and I encourage everyone to look this up. It's a conference that Heckman hosted. He's hosted several. This is the head of Autism, which is an online testing company that's tracking the big 5 ocean traits. So your openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay, so this is what they're tracking for the markets. And what this gentleman says is that as a former administrator of a suburban Chicago public school district, are we going to tell parents who are tracking their kids' neuroticism? Nope. So that's all the children, right? But imagine, particularly children where behavior, where they're tracking their behavior, desiring certain different behavioral outcomes. I think that special needs kids, parents really need to understand what is coming with all of this. The other thing about Heckman, so this economics group, and I didn't realize it at the time when I first came across his work, but he also hosted a special seminar on the gut microbiome, okay? And as a social determinants of health. So as a social justice movement of managing the microbiome. And I'm not nearly as familiar as I'm sure some of you are, but clearly like the gut health and connections to spectrum disorder are present. And I later learned that DuPont is working in the microbiome space, and the NIH is doing national mapping of the microbiome. And so there's a lot of attention being paid on this microbiome research by people who I think may not have the best interests of vulnerable kids at heart. They will say that they do, but how would they actually want to do that engineering? So I think those of you who are aware, like, I would highly encourage you to look into this further. In the pre-K space, what do these data analytics look like? They're talking about changing behavior. They have surveillance play tables in place, Hatch Education, where they have children play at these play tables with fisheye lens cameras, that's on the left, and then they grade them on their social behaviors. And again, I have really grave concerns about what that means for children where social cues are already a challenge, like navigating that. So this is in place through EduCare, Head Start pre-K programs, and I know for sure that they're being used in Tulsa. So, the 100th anniversary of the race massacre in Tulsa, and they have North Tulsa Head Start kids on surveillance play tables. And it's unclear, and they even have facial recognition, I think, for a photo recognition for their login, because these children are 3 and 4 and they can't even do the login, but they need the data. So it's unclear if AI is scoring these children or somebody else, but it's not their teacher. And then on the other side, Wharton, which is a huge center of the social impact economy. Again, I had mentioned Judith Rodin. There's a people analytics conference, and they have developed something called Affectiva. And I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with it. Ostensibly, it was developed to help kids on the spectrum with social cues. This is out of MIT, Rosalind Picard. But then in the affective computing group, eventually they leveraged Affectiva. It was a motion sensing software on cameras, on tablets, to leverage it for A/B testing for movies, for tracking children's engagement on online learning software, through tracking people in cars for if their sleepiness. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that this emotion tracking software is being used. So even as we start to better understand surveillance in education spaces, many people are not understanding the degree to which they're layered in with all of the technologies, and the way in which, if you understand that digital brainwashing is going to be a global impact market, this is a key piece. They want to track the children's behaviors. The other piece that's really growing increasingly is virtual reality, and they're framing it as an empathy machine. Okay, this is also layered in with the United Nations. And so again, I know that CHOP here in Philadelphia, they were doing work which I found reprehensible with people, I believe, who had been formerly with Amazon, of using virtual reality to train autistic children to behave better with the police. I mean, just say, so I mean, I know clearly there are issues around that, but should we maybe not be telling the police not to shoot autistic people? I mean, you know, like, but the fact that somehow you're going to engineer these children to conform within this sort of what I consider, you know, a militarized imperial environment is pretty horrible. And once you know that this is an impact market, you know, I think the VR is a key piece. And actually, here you go. So they're talking specifically about using virtual reality in the autistic community. That is a focus of, and again, you know, I don't want to, you know, I would be interested in how parents feel about this, because that's not my experience, and people may feel like the benefits outweigh the risks, but I think that people need to understand the larger landscape that this is rolling out in. So all of these are military technologies, and this is a slide share from JCA Solutions, which is a defense contractor based in Orlando, and it's talking about competency-based education, where it's done through virtual reality and haptics, like the handsets, and they are training kids to demonstrate in virtual reality certain skills. And that when they demonstrate certain skills, it goes to a learning locker. And I can certainly imagine for certain communities that they would be saying, well, this is better than learning it with a person. Look, you can just learn it in virtual reality and score yourself, and it's like you're living in a video game world, which may feel more comfortable for certain people. I don't know. But again, this is a military technology. Many people are not realizing that the VR actually pulls data back out. There's biometrics that are, you're not just engaging with the material, it's actually responding to you. So this is from the same slide share where they're talking about training children. Ostensibly, it looks like to work in an Amazon warehouse, and that it's almost post-literacy, post-knowledge, that with augmented reality tablets, you don't need to know anything. You just hold up the tablet and it tells you what button to push on the machine, because next week you'll be pushing buttons for some other part of a machine. But the information being pulled out of these headsets include things like your heart rate, your motion, your biometrics, your physical location. Is tracking all of this and scoring you according to somebody else's determination of what success looks like, right? So this is the structure. And all of this is going into these learning lockers, which are based on military simulation technology. So this is from this People Near, a map from Global Education Futures Forum, which is when I fell down the rabbit hole. This is a global group. It was led by Pavel Leksha, who's a transhumanist in the United States. Tom Vander Ark, who worked for the Gates Foundation. He was the head of the first virtual school outside Seattle, and is you know, working in the educational technology space. They had a map of what education looked like through 2035. This is a foresight document, imagining, they're projecting based on their knowledge. And they were talking about people nairs, that certain entities would hold fortunes that were portfolios of human capital. And in fact, just in mid-March, there's an entity that came out called Anthropos, Anthropos Capital. The head of this, it is a special purpose acquisition group based in the Cayman Islands to invest in human capital as a resource companies. And the head of that was formerly worked for Bridgewater Associates. That's Ray Dalio, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. So we're getting very close to creating these human capital data markets on compliance. Again, the behavior tracking is really a concern of mine. And I know that, you know, I don't mean to discount the issue, and clearly people need tools to help kids feel comfortable and in their settings and with others, and so that they are not stressed out. But increasingly what we're seeing wholesale for all communities is this PBIS framework that is, I'm trying to remember what PBS, positive behavioral intervention and support, but it's behaviorist. It's very much a token economy type of thing. And here they talk about specifically using it for focused in the autism community. You know, we see, I pulled this image with the reward card with the QR code. This is several years old, right? Now we see a QR code and we feel very differently about it, at least here in the West, where we're not used to seeing them. But now we're seeing QR codes tracked to access, contact tracing, geofencing, COVID testing. These are all being tied in with the data analytics, with the digital identity. And in this PBIS system, you can see on the phone with this gold coin, they're talking about token economics, paying children for good behavior. And this is all kinds of children, but I think within the special needs community and understanding that being leveraged into digital environments and digital behavior tracking and surveillance apps. Classcraft is a Google product, and they're talking about PBIS with Classcraft and badges and money, how that connects, because ultimately, this is in Australia, they're putting their disability benefits on blockchain and using it as programmable money. They're programming the money. So if you can imagine this PBIS token badges for compliance is to normalize this for children, and families as they navigate the disability community, the needing services, right? This is the National Disability Insurance Scheme in Australia. They have programmed the money and made it conditional. And they're framing that as choice and liberation, but it isn't going to be many choices. So again, I mentioned before the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. I encourage people to look deeply into this because it is not simply injectables or pills at this point. It is going to be prescription video games. Achille was developed. You can see there, it says it's time to play your medicine. That was developed out of UCSF Neuroscape Lab in San Francisco. They spun it over to Boston. It was backed by many big pharma companies, including Joy Ito of MIT Media Lab. The clinical trials were done by Duke. And they have a myriad other products in the pipeline for digital therapeutics. And if you understand that the impact markets are going to bet on success outcomes, right? Like who gets to decide how your child's brain is going to be digitally engineered? And they're actually talking now about digital vaccines. And I have a talk with Sergi about digital vaccines with Carnegie Mellon. So again, Harman enters into a global partnership with Roche to develop a digital therapeutic technology for individuals living with autism. Okay, so, and again, I believe everyone should have an informed choice, but that informed choice should understand what the power dynamics are in this equation, and that a lot of these technologies have these military ties and finance ties. And I'm getting towards the end here. Oh, good, I'm pretty good on time.
Alex, don't rush. We had as you know, a change in the schedule, so
keep it on.
No need to rush.
Yeah, and also,
well, I think I'm getting towards the end, and then I would love to open it up if people have thoughts or comments.
With some questions.
We do have time.
Yeah, I know this is a lot, and it's kind of intense if you haven't come across this part of it before.
And you've done a great job explaining it. Oh my gosh, it's amazing what you've uncovered. But you'll have until 12. So
okay, all right, good. Well, so. When I coming into last March, I had a really good handle on the finance around education, around technology, around poverty, because I will emphasize Philadelphia is a large city. We have a number of institutions of higher education, including Wharton Business School, that is sort of perpetrating this. We are a test bed because we are a very poor city. And, I think it's important to understand when we talk about options and navigating this, that certain people have, because of their socioeconomic or other access, more options than others. And the people who will likely be on the front lines of this are going to be people who have limited financial resources, who are dependent on these state systems because it will be all conditional on these impact markets. The piece that I was not familiar with so much was the healthcare, even though Penn has done a lot in terms of behavioral economics around the health sector and digital tracking the Internet of Bodies. I was not very familiar with nanotechnology. I was not very familiar with this idea of the Internet of Bodies. I remember coming across Roberto Viola with the EU 2 years ago, finding out him talking about the Internet of Humans and being just shocked that someone would talk about such a thing. But the expansion of sensor networks, and again, our city is the home of Comcast and a lot of heavy presence of telecom. So I have more 5G infrastructure within a half mile of my house than you can even imagine. I need a field guide to show all the different kinds of technologies that are out there. So I connected with some teachers in Tokyo. Maybe it was in the winter, and they said, Allison, have you read this moonshot paper? And I said, no. And they said, you really, people send me a lot of stuff and I can't always pay attention to it, and then I lose track of it. But I did. So I looked at this moonshot paper from the Japan Science and Technology Agency. This is the government of Japan. Japan has SoftBank, which is a large banking interest. It runs the largest innovation fund in AI and robotics. Okay, so it's nothing to sneeze at. Nippon Telegraph and Telephone is working on 6G technology and digital twinning. Okay, and in this moonshot paper, their first goal, now who knows if they can actually accomplish this, or they're just, shooting out crazy ideas, but they said by 2050, we will be removed of the burden of living in a physical body and mind in time and space. Okay, and I encourage you to look up the paper. I mean, I don't want to know these things, right? I don't, but I mean, they have the money behind them. If it were possible, there would be probably nobody else better situated to make such a thing happen. And they're saying, look, we have all these elderly people in Japan. It's also connected to this next level of global labor, which is called globotics, GLOBOTICS, which is, we know what it looks like to platform labor, VIP kid, online education services, clearly call centers and coding services. But the next version is through virtual reality and haptics to outsource even physical labor. So this paper is saying it'll be wonderful. We'll have nurses in the Philippines taking care of the elderly in Japan with robots. And we'll have women in Kenya cleaning hotel rooms in Oslo with robots. And we'll have, landscape contractors in Mexico mowing lawns in Texas with robots. Okay. And so this is this future that they are imagining, and it takes a certain kind of understanding of what life is to agree to that, right? And so, where do special needs people fit into this equation, right? Where do people who are being potentially groomed into pipelines for this globotic workforce, the AI will assign this work, and it will be based on what you have in your locker of tokens and what your behaviors are and what your skill sets are. And, I was doing some work a few months ago, and a lot of this, I mean, this is again, military defense, but it's not just the US. Israel is a big piece of this too. There's a lot, social finance. Ronald Cohen set up the first social impact bonds, and he's in the UK and London. Michael Bloomberg, I mean, he's just as scarier than Bill Gates, in my opinion, brought this to the United States. He owns mayors all over the country in Europe and India to set up this data-driven government. This is connected to e-government. And he also, so we have a social finance here in the US, which is connected to Goldman Sachs, among others. And then they also have one in Israel. And I gave a 4-hour presentation to Israel saying, the thing you're building with biotech, nanotech, surveillance is going to come after your grandkids someday. Like, you're not going to be out of this. Your children will be investable commodities by New York hedge funds or the Vatican or Alibaba or SoftBank. Like, this is what we're building if we don't stop it. And so in Israel, everyone has military service. They screen people for their skills, right? And so they have actually, the alumni of the 82 unit has a social impact accelerator, but they also have a new division that's called, I believe, the 990 unit, that is about analyzing satellite imagery. And in that, and you can look, I believe it's 990, not 9200. I think it's the 990 unit. The Israeli Defense Forces, and they said specifically that they are recruiting autistic children into that program because they have a skill set, a focus, and attention to detail that works really well for that kind of work. And so if we imagine that the future that the SoftBank et al. Are imagining, that is almost post-human or a cybernetic, a fusion of humans and machines, is advancing, and that cybersecurity in this augmented reality, mixed reality world is an imperative, right? Because it is a military infrastructure. And imagine what we know about hacking, when the hacking might come into your biosensors, some nanorobotics that are internal to your physical body. This cybersecurity space is really important. So anyway, this is my last thing, but that's they're working on the cybersecurity, the Internet of Bodies. Okay, so this is the Moonshot project, the cyber physical environment, and Globotics. They want people to live as avatars. That is actually really what they want. They want you to reimagine yourself in that way, which may feel comfortable to some people. And then but they're also creating revenue streams. This is tied to the video game industry. Epic Games is a huge part of this, and their Unreal Engine. And you see their tagline, this is for virtual reality work, that they want selfie-based avatars to love and connect with, the avatars. Okay, and that goes back to the RoboKind. So this is just my last image. This is an image of Japan is developing store restocking with these crazy robots. I mean, you couldn't pick a scarier looking robot, but the actual image was like a person sitting in a closet, and then they were running the robot that was in the convenience store. And all of this, I highly recommend this book if people want to get a different perspective on the technology, is that it's Yasha Levine's military history of the internet. And it's a good complement to Shoshana Zuboff's surveillance capitalism, because I think it's really important to understand it as a military apparatus. So anyway, that's what I got.
Allison, amazing. Thank you so much.
I know, I'm sorry to be so heavy, but like, the thing is, like, I trust parents. Everyone's always like, Allison, who do you trust? I'm like, I trust parents who are doing this for the right reasons, and you guys are organized. And so if we can try to, I don't know that this can happen. Like, in my heart, I believe this doesn't end this way. But those of us who know have a responsibility to hopefully empower other people who have the strength of heart to see it and refuse it, because I think that's where it ends.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we have time for a little less than 10 minutes. So maybe Maria, do people want to raise their hands with their, you can do that. Well, people can actually raise their hands physically.
Or I can't see everybody. Do you mind just calling?
Patty, do you want to ask a question or make a comment? No. Anybody else?
Oh, Suzanne does.
Suzanne?
So I'm just wondering where this intersects with mandates, because the way I see this going forward is it would have to be mandated for people to kind of agree to it to a certain degree. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
In terms of, I think it will be a condition of accessing services. They will say, this is how we do it, and if you don't want it, then you don't get the services, right? And so that is the whole social impact finance is predicated on the public-private partnership. And so they're outsourcing everything, and they'll just say, well, if you don't want to, you don't have to, but then you can't access the service unless it's on our terms. You don't have choice. Although I do think there will be a framing of choice, especially in the health community. But even my concern is that, as we've seen with so many things around what's unfolded over the past year, is there are two paths. There are people who are ostensibly holistic or alternative who are following a mainstream narrative, and then there are those who are following an alternative narrative, right? And so my sense is the choice will still be the whole, my concern is this will be tied not only to digital vouchers for education, but health savings accounts. I think ultimately the plan will be to weaponize health savings accounts and allow people to divert money into them, and to, possibly to have top-ups with federal accounts, but that they will be conditional. And I don't have this slide in here, but I can add it maybe when I share it, share the slide deck with everyone. The state of Illinois in 2018 did a blockchain task force working group. And they're looking at this, as I said, this is all connected to electronic government and you being a digital citizen really to your government. And then ultimately the plan is just to take away national boundaries altogether, and you just become a digital citizen of the world, and you become part of the people in their portfolio. But so they were looking at things like certifications on blockchain for healthcare professionals, birth certificates. They did a pilot program putting children with Evernym on blockchain. And they were imagining, although they did not yet implement it, putting food stamps on blockchain with coded nudges. And so you would have a person, they would have a digital wallet with their food assistance. And then depending on what you purchased, it would be incentivized with a token. So if you bought the apple instead of the hamburger, they would kick you back some money. Now, my concern with that model is that who's deciding what is the right choice? I mean, clearly the apple and the hamburger seems like an obvious one, but what if it becomes, we've tracked your genomics. We know that there are these DNA nudge bands that are tied to COVID testing. And we say, oh, you know, your child, or you are potentially pre-diabetic, and therefore you need to do this, or you need to take our GMO vaccine laced food, because they're putting vaccines in food now. And then that's the incentive. Or if the incentive isn't just food, but it is a health service, right? Oh, if you want the health service that isn't evidence-based, that's an upcharge. Oh, you want, you know, the some other type of behavioral therapy treatment that isn't the preferred one, well, that's an upcharge. And so then eventually people will be drained dry, and the people who are kept off of getting the blockchain reimbursement will go out of business. That's how I see it. But I don't think anybody wants this. That's the thing. Like, I would say like 99.5% of the world would think this is a horror if they actually knew it was coming.
Right. Susan Ray, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you so much for this, Allison. My question is, you showed a slide, said something about these big business entities doing something with respect to microbiome. And I'm wondering if you could say in a nutshell what you know they're doing along these lines. Does it correspond with the other scary things you're showing us? And it's that they want to try to not just understand, but manipulate our and our kids' microbiomes?
Well, I would say if folks have not yet watched Dark Waters, the Mark Ruffalo film about DuPont poisoning everyone with Teflon, it's really good. And like, I think once you realize DuPont is getting into the microbiome space, I think clearly, so the NIH, and I will just say this sort of quickly. So I live in Philly. I do believe that we are somewhat in a spiritual engagement here, that there are these larger forces at work, you know, that what we are doing happens even beyond the material world, right? And so there was actually, and this may seem a bit out there, but in Philadelphia, in the park, there's a cave called the Kelpius Cave. And Johannes Kelpius was a Christian mystic who in the 1690s came with this millenarian group to wait for the end of the world, for the woman in the wilderness in Philadelphia, because he was this Johannes Zimmerman. So there's this cave in the public park there, and it's connected. It was like the first hymnals, like the first portrait in the New World was of this guy. And it's very interesting. And so there's a monument outside the door put up by the Rosicrucians, which is also kind of strange, but it's there. And on the side of this granite monument that's like 4 feet by 8 feet, it's about 8 inches wide, painted in hand lettering in Greek is Nephili. Okay, it says Nephili in Greek on the side. And I'm like, and I went out there because I wanted to see it, and I don't even speak Greek. And my husband's like, that says Nephili. And I'm like, well, what is Nephili? And it turns out it is the Greek myth where Ixion, who was like, I think one of the first murderers in Greek mythology, was lusting after Hera, Zeus's wife. And so Zeus remade Nephili, who was a cloud nymph, into a twin of his wife, who was then raped. And from that, the centaurs came. And they're talking that centaurs, we should no longer call cyborgs, but they should be centaurs, which is a little crazy. And there are some other things around the golden, but there's the NIH created a mapping the microbiome initiative, and they've called it Nephili. Okay. And they say it's because of this myth, right? And somebody went to that monument and painted that outside that cave. Now, Penn is also doing human CRISPR trials and a lot of gene research and gene therapies. And Penn is also doing the stuff with the impact finance. And so clearly there is a lot of interest in managing people's microbiomes, in understanding that there is a connection between gut health and brain health, that there is power in controlling that. And that, you know, some of that knowledge goes way back. And I have a lot of concerns around food system transformations that are underway and the move towards warehoused and further industrializations of creating food in sterile spaces, like these greens in freight containers that are grown on apps. And I just sort of advanced that yesterday, but I thought, you know, if they sterilize the food and then they say, well, look, we're going to level the playing field by feeding everyone the same food, you know, like a vegan based, whenever 3D printed food coming out of a warehouse where you have to wear a sterilizer, hazmat suit to go in so you don't contaminate it, that there is no microbiome, that then they can write their technology through their chemical systems into people's guts, really. They can program them that way. And so that is a bit of a stretch for me, but I know that all of these things are in motion right now, and the Rockefeller is behind a lot of them. And so I would be open to learning more for people who are more familiar with microbiome work. The fact that Jim Heckman and DuPont are both have their hands in that space is very worrisome. And I think it's significant because I think they do know that there are connections between, gut health and people's overall, wellness. So.
Allison, thank you so much. We actually do have in this group a lot of people who know quite a bit about microbiome, so we can be back on that. We're going to admit here Doug Weissman. As many of you know, we lost an incredible friend and colleague and mom warrior this week, Katie Weissman. And so we have Amy Capobianco Diaz and Doug Weissman who are here to tell us a little bit about Katie's remarkable life, and we'll have a few minutes for people to remember and reflect. Amy? You have to unmute and then you should be good to go.
My apologies, I am not technologically great, so just bear with me. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me. This is my first time joining the retreat, and I feel very honored to be in the presence of such wonderfully strong, powerful, and brilliant people. Autism has touched us all, whether it's directly or with our own children or someone in our life that we love dearly. And one thing I am so grateful for are the bonds that I've made and the connections with these wonderful people. So thank you so much. I'm going to read from my notes so I can get through this hopefully without tears. On behalf of the Weissman family, I'd like to start by thanking you all for your love, support, and prayers for Katie over these past years since she was first diagnosed with myeloma in 2012. Katie was my dearest friend and one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. We met almost 20 years ago when my oldest son began kindergarten with her 3 beautiful boys, Nick, Alex, and Don. It was also the year that my youngest son was diagnosed with autism and vaccine injured. The kind woman I had met suddenly transformed into this fearless warrior and advocate, a true mama bear for all. I certainly had no idea the force I was dealing with. To say Katie has left her mark in this world is a great understatement. She has impacted the lives of so many children and their families. The numbers are endless. Her passionate contributions to incredible organizations and groups such as Children's Health Defense, Age of Autism, and Safe Minds, to name a few, will resonate forever. She was a fierce advocate for vaccine safety and the vaccine injured, and created bonds with Mercury moms and dads that span the globe. Katie was a role model for all whose lives changed when a loved one was diagnosed with autism. She was the embodiment of someone making lemonade out of lemons and allowed families to look at autism as a different and wonderful way to approach life, not as something tragic. Katie's idea of light reading was reading medical journals and scientific studies. I often told her how much I loved her big, beautiful brain. Humbly, she would laugh. She was an avid gardener and saw the beauty in everything she touched. She was a proud member of the philanthropic educational organization and was an active member in the Mount Kisco community, where she was part of the village's beautification committee, and where we collaborated and first launched Kind Find, a program to educate police officers about people with autism. She was especially active within our school district as an advocate for families of children with autism, a co-president of our SEPTO, a co-creator of the Bedford Autism Spectrum Support Group, and where we created the Autism Assembly for our 5 elementary schools. The lists of Katie's achievements are endless, but none were more important to her than her dedication to her children to ensure they grew into the fine young men they are today. Just before Katie went into the hospital this last time, we had a conversation that will remain in my heart forever. It was one of the first beautiful warm days we had this spring. Katie was enjoying the warm air and sunshine from the nearby open window, and as she lay in her bed, unable to move, she looked at me and said, "Amy, what could I possibly be upset about? I was born to 2 incredibly brilliant parents who allowed me to learn so much and explore everything. I have a wonderful husband and the 3 greatest sons who bring me such happiness. I have the greatest, most supportive friends and people that are literally praying for me around the world. How can I be upset? I can't move the way I am used to. It's just different. I will learn to do things in other ways." That pretty much sums up Katie. She was nothing short of extraordinary. She was the ultimate warrior mom, wife, friend, and my personal superhero. And her legacy will live on through all of us, and especially through our children. It is time to take the cape off, Katie. You've passed the torch to us, and we will continue to do the fighting for you. I love you, my dear friend. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful tribute. And we're delighted to have Doug Weissman, Katie's husband, with us. Would you like to say anything, Doug?
I am not certain I can.
There's no need. It's just, we want to honor you for being here, and we're so grateful that you're here.
Thank you. And thank you for everything. She loved you all.
Well, we loved Katie. I speak from those who had the privilege to know her over the last 20 years as another autism parent. And I saw her incredible drive and brilliance and knew the work that she was doing in Washington on funding for autism and research for autism. But I know the work that she did with Safe Minds, but in the last couple of years, I've gotten to know Katie through Children's Health Defense. And, you know, she just is brilliant and always there to help people, and so focused in her work, and so confident in her intelligence, and her and so motivated to help others always. And so it's a terrible loss for all of us as her friend, to lose a friend, but also a loss for Children's Health Defense. And we're very proud that Doug has allowed us to have a fellowship in Katie's honor. So we have the Katie Weissman Fellowship at Children's Health Defense to carry on the wonderful work that Katie did.
Absolutely. Just I stopped by the hospital today to thank the nurses. The night she died, while she was in the coma before she died, I was talking to the nurse that was overseeing her care. And I said, you know, how amazing she was. And the nurse said, "We all know that. One of our nurses is engaged. Katie helped her pick a wedding dress." One time she was talking to some researcher. We said, "Wow, you know, where did you get your PhD in biochemistry?" She said, I don't have a PhD in biochemistry. I have a bachelor's in fashion. I went to Pratt Institute. I was a fashion designer. But she was brilliant, and she could do anything she set her mind to. When I went to the hospital the other day to thank the nurses, the head nurse said to me, the nursing supervisor for the entire force said, "We all loved your wife." You know, the day after she passed, I had half a dozen nurses in my office crying. And when she was admitted most recently, the head nurse actually spent some time with her, helping her navigate the halls and stuff like that, because she was still able to walk at that point. And she said to my wife, how do you do it? And Casey, you just have to be kind. And that's all. So she is a force, and she is more than my better half. She's my better 3/4. And to create some kind of fellowship at Children's Health Defense is the most perfect way to honor her. So how can we do anything else? So thank you.
Doug, thank you so much. I know there were others who knew Katie well. Does anyone else want to speak?
All right, if Doug can do it, I can do it. Just will miss her desperately. And as we said to Katie, we'll always be there to help you, Doug, and the boys, and just continue on with all the amazing messages and help and love that she took the time to share with us, even when she wasn't feeling well. She would always respond to a text or call. Well, not a text, she wasn't a texter, but a call or an email. And we will just continue on with that. And we will never, ever forget. She's always in our hearts, always. And we love you guys.
I had a chance, unfortunately, to know Katie very well. It seems like I got to know most of everyone from the retreat, and Katie never made it, unfortunately, to the retreat, but she would have been right there with us as one of the tribe. But from all the sentiments and feelings and the love that her friends and her family have poured out, she was definitely a remarkable woman. And it's my loss not to have gotten to have known her better. So why don't we take a couple of minutes and we'll all say our prayers for Katie, her family, and also all of our loved ones too that could be suffering right now. So let's just take a couple of minutes and close our eyes and put those intentions out there. Okay, let's all take a deep cleansing breath. Okay. All right. Let's slowly take our souls and our hearts and bring us all back up to our day, to our challenges, to our connections here. Without having Dr. Thomas, we're going to actually have Patty Limmer talk about her book, Envision a Better Future, Envision
Outsmarting Autism.
What's it called again?
Outsmarting Autism.
That was her old book, Outsmarting Autism. But I'd like to just say a couple of things before you get started, Patty. Allison, your talk is just absolutely amazing. And, you know, as you're going through this, I keep thinking of we're breaking our children to fix them. And we've turned our children into you know, I'm thinking of the horse races. You know, you bet on a really strong horse to give birth to a colt, and you throw money towards that, and then you throw money towards the manager and the trainer and the stables. And by the time that horse races, that horse might have had $5 million plugged into it. But what you're saying is that they don't really care about the outcome of the horse. They're trading on the debt of that $5 million of what it took that colt to become a racing horse. I just can't think of anything more insidious than what they're doing to our kids. And I don't know if Jane Dolan's on right now. Jane, are you still on by any chance? I don't think so. I don't hear her. Anyway, she was on earlier. Jane, she was at the retreat last year, and she runs the BRMI, the Bioregulating Medicine Institute. And her last, that last show featured a guy named Greg Glaser, who's a lawyer in California. And he did an amazing study. I mean, an amazing study on vaccinated versus the vaccinated versus unvaccinated, not just how it relates to children, but actually adults. And it was pretty ironclad what they came up with. And the disease, the mental and physical disease that are created by these things, it's just so stark. You know, and then it kind of, Allison, you kind of are pulling it all together, because all of us were saying, why would they do that? Why would, you know, what's the point of this? And you're just taking that story and bringing it to the next level. So thank you for educating us.
Mary, Jane is on.
Oh, Jane, you are?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, now I can hear you. Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that interview that BRMI did with Greg Glaser?
Yeah, it's just such a powerful unvaccinated versus vaccinated, just the facts. And it's just so glaring when you really see how much has been obscured from us, you know, because the study has never been done from the CDC before, you know. For how many years has that been, you know, requested and not occurred?
I just mentioned I have a video from Greg Glaser, a 15-minute video about their control group study that I'll send to everybody. It's very powerful about the health of the unvaccinated, and it makes us understand why this drive is so important for these capital markets.
If I may, sorry, he goes into, you know, really that this group is in danger of becoming extinct. That, you know, that's really kind of the drive behind pharma, is that if you're able to erase this group, then you can never really see what is happening here. And when you put it in that context, it just becomes so profound for us to really, you know, keep pushing for this information to get out.
Yeah. If I may add something, meaning, and I'm in awe of all of you that are so strong activists, because in a way I'm still in the trenches with a son that has a very severe disability. But so my fight has been a different one, and is what if, we have to, meaning all this movement is to say, how do we avoid this to happen to kids? But my question is, what if we have autism wrong? And my son, who is a non-speaking young man, and it's been my experience, and we're going to hear this afternoon from James Lee Hadley, it's like these kids are locked inside their bodies. So all that Allison was telling you is to train them, assuming that they don't understand and they don't know what they're doing, and there's nothing that productive that they can do in their life because they're dead inside. And it's not true. They're locked in. So how is it that how can you discover the person inside working with a robotic teacher? But the ABA teachers are not better than a robot, by the way. So anyway, just pouring my heart out.
I just want to emphasize that the social impact finance is built on, they talk about, it's not built on ever solving the issues. And in fact, if they create a profit center, what it's about is actually growing that market of potential harm or deficit. And I'm not saying but profiling people as a deficit, whether that, in many cases it may not be true, to grow that market and to manage it better, to manage it with more data, right? Because that's what grows their market. And so there is a fiction that you will unlock global capital and somehow it will lead to healed people. Because people who have good health and well-being and are independent and have autonomy don't make money for Goldman Sachs. And that's just that's what people need to understand at the baseline. That is true.
Yeah.
We have Paul Thomas now. He just checked in. I don't know where he was, but he's back. So we'll try to get him in for 25 minutes. Patty, you've been bumped. Sorry. But I was going to say what you were saying, Jane and Allison and Maria and everyone, is that my old friend Eileen Mitzman, she's an old Jewish woman at 85 years old, and her favorite joke was, the answer's money. What's the question? And I think about the joke for our generation is, the answer is they want to get rid of the control group. What's the question? Because everybody's trying to figure all it out, but if you keep going down to that, they just want to get rid of the control group. That's it. So
Great.
Yeah. Oh, Elena.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I've listened to several of your podcasts, Allison, or your interviews, and I'm just wondering how people that are not in a group like this receive your message, and what are people doing about it? Thank you.
Well, it's a big message, right? I mean, essentially, and you guys are living through having the world not be, what you thought. We're navigating things where other people imagine the world one way, and that the world operates in very different rules. And so, yeah, Tom Cowan has a really nice piece recently. He talks about Plato's cave, and like my family doesn't even get me on this, and it's very hard, because I come at this from a mom standpoint about protecting kids, but they can't look at it yet. They're not able to, but I feel a responsibility. So I would say for the most part, nobody, other than I've gone at loggerheads with the Bitcoin people, I get very little pushback because what I'm telling people is the truth. I mean, people may analyze it differently. People may look at these facts and come at a different analysis. Most people don't. Most people aren't coming because what I'm saying is just, this is what I'm seeing. This is this landscape. If we know how power works, how would it be different unless we demand that it be different? So, it's growing. I mean, there's people all over the world for whom my friend Cliff says, you can't change anyone's mind. You can just put your intention in the world, and then there are intercessors that take it where it needs to go. Right. So I can't convince my husband or my college age child, but there are people all around the world. Like we're doing actually, and I would invite people, my blog is called wrenchinthegears.com, and I have a post called the Dandelion Manifesto. And so it came to me because I do feel like this is a spiritual engagement, like a broad faith, energetic connection. And I work in a botanic garden, not as a horticulturalist, although I've spent more time lately on the land. And the dandelions came to me, and someone said, you need to do something with dandelions. And, I looked into the symbolism of, the sun and the moon and the resilience and the medicinal qualities of the dandelion, and that Hecate fed Theseus for 30 days before he fought the Minotaur, which I'm pretty sure is Wall Street, on dandelion greens. And so I've connected with people in New York City, and we're going to go around to all of these places who are implementing human capital finance and do these dandelion revocations of consent, because we don't have the money of Goldman Sachs, and we don't have the toys of DARPA. We don't have these things, but we do have our agreement, our disagreement on this. And we do have a connection to natural systems. And so we actually started on Easter Sunday at the Council on Foreign Relations, right? We went to the beginning.
Allison, thank you so much. That was really
there are people who are receiving, if people would like to send me dandelions, you can find my address on my blog.
And we'll send it to everybody. Thank you so much, Allison. It was great. And we're happy to welcome